It is the late 7th to early 8th century in the Kingdom of Powys, or modern-day Wales, and a woman called Melangeth is about to make a bit of a name for herself. Melangeth was a princess of Ireland who fled across the sea to avoid an arranged marriage. She lived in the wilderness as a consecrated virgin, that is, somebody who dedicates their chastity to God's glory, and she did so for 15 years before being discovered by a prince by the name of Brockwell Isgithrog. Brockwell was hunting in the area of Pennant with his hounds, who had picked up the scent of a hare. The prince gave chase, following in his hounds' paw prints, until they led him to what is recorded as a virgin, beautiful in appearance, devoutly praying. This beautiful virgin was, of course, Melangeth, and the hare the hounds were chasing was lying safely under the hem of her dress as she prayed. Though these hounds were not likely to give up on a kill so easily, for no discernible reason, they retreated and fled away from Melangeth and the hare. The prince, however, was intrigued by the woman and sat with her a while, hearing her story and considering what her presence in his land meant. Moved by what she had told him, Brockwell donated the wilderness that Melangeth had been residing in to her officially, granting perpetual asylum to both her, but also to the animals of the area. Melangeth lived for another 37 years in this place, founding and becoming the abbess, a word meaning the head nun, of a community of nuns there. The hares and wild animals of the area allegedly behaved as if they were tamed towards Melangeth. It is recorded that after Melangeth's death, somebody by the name of Elise attempted to attack the nuns for reasons since lost to time, but that she came to an end most wretchedly and perished suddenly. That is the life story of one of the only two female Welsh saints to have an official Latin hagiography, a word meaning the official record of a saint's life, with the other belonging to a woman named Winifred. Melangeth is the patron saint of hares. Her feast day is celebrated on the 27th of May, and she, her convent, and her shrine are so well known in the area that the region that was named Pennant has become known as Pennant Melangeth. For many centuries, her association with hares was so strong that locals would not kill a hare in the parish of Pennant Melangeth. And there is even a Welsh nickname for hares, Wyn Melangeth, which translates to St. Melangeth's lambs. A local belief sprang forth that if one saw a hare pursued by dogs in the area, you would merely have to cry out, "God and Saint Monacella be with thee," Monacella being the Latinized version of Melangeth's name, and the hare was sure to escape. The earliest part of Pennant Melangeth's church and shrine dates back to the 12th century, though it was likely an 8th century foundation. At the east end of the church, a small chamber existed called the Cell of the Grave, which existed to display Melangeth's remains for visiting pilgrims. During the Reformation, however, the cell was turned into a schoolroom and the shrine was dismantled, with the sculpted stones of the shrine being reused in the walls and the gate. However, in 1958, restoration work was undertaken, which included reconstructing the shrine in its original location. In 1991, the reconstructed shrine was moved to its present location, in the chancel. If you are enjoying our content, I would like to take the time now to encourage you to leave us a like and subscribe to see more content like it. Born in the late 11th century in the Holy Roman Empire's province of the Rhineland, in modern-day Germany, was a woman known as Hildegard of Bingen, sometimes referred to as Sibyl of the Rhine. Like Melangeth, she became an abbess later in life, but she was also known to be a polymath, a visionary, an author, composer, a mystic, a medical practitioner, and a philosopher. Her parents were Mechtild of Merxheim-Nehet and Hildebert of Bermersheim, a family of the free lower nobility, sworn to the Count Megenhard of Sponheim. Although only records of 7 older siblings have survived, it is generally accepted that Hildegard was the 10th child of her parents' union, and in her hagiography she is described as having had visions from God from a young age. So potent was her spiritual awareness that she described it as being grounded in the umbra viventis lucis, which translates to the reflection of the living light. At the age of 77, she would write a letter to her secretary, a monk named Guibert, describing this reflection. From my early childhood, before my bones, nerves, and veins were fully strengthened, I have always seen this vision in my soul, even to the present time when I am more than 70 years old. In this vision, my soul, as God would have it, rises up high into the vault of heaven and into the changing sky and spreads itself out among different peoples, although they are far away from me in distant lands and places. And because I see them this way, in my soul, I observe them in accord with the shifting of clouds and other created things. I do not hear them with my outward ears, nor do I perceive them by the thoughts of my own heart or by any combination of my 5 senses, but in my soul alone, while my outward eyes are open. So I have never fallen prey to ecstasy in the visions, but I see them wide awake, day and night. And I am constantly fettered by sickness, and often in the grip of pain so intense that it threatens to kill me, but God has sustained me until now. The light which I see thus is not spatial, but it is far, far brighter than a cloud which carries the sun. I can measure neither height nor length nor breadth in it, and I call it the reflection of the living light. And as the sun, the moon, and the stars appear in water, so writings, sermons, virtues, and certain human actions take form for me and gleam. It is debated whether or not Hildegard was committed to the monastery at Disibodenberg at the age of 8, or whether she stayed in the care of an older girl there from the age of 8, being committed to the monastery only at the age of 14. But what can certainly be said is that she was young when she was committed. Hildegard, along with the aforementioned girl, Jutta, were enclosed together at Disibodenberg, and formed the core of a growing community of women attached to the monastery of monks, a gathering referred to as a Frauenklaus. Hildegard records that Jutta was the one who taught her to read and to write, but due to her being unlearned, she could not teach Hildegard sound biblical interpretation. The two of them likely spent their time reciting the Psalms, tending to the monastery's garden and other handiwork, and tending to the sick. This was also likely the time that Hildegard learned to play the psaltery, a 10-stringed fretless ancestor to instruments such as the zither, dulcimer, and even the harpsichord. This time spent in music was likely the beginning of her compositional efforts. In 1136, Jutta found peace in the embrace of the Lord and passed away, and Hildegard was unanimously elected as the magistra, or the head of her fellow nuns. The abbot, Kuno of Disibodenberg, asked Hildegard to be the prioress of the monastery, placing her under his authority. But Hildegard, wanting more independence for herself and her nuns, asked the abbot to allow them to move to Rupertsberg. The abbot declined Hildegard's request, but Hildegard went over his head, receiving the approval of Archbishop Henry I of Mainz. The abbot, however, did not let up, until Hildegard was stricken by an illness that paralyzed her, leaving her bedbound. Hildegard attributed this event to God's unhappiness with the abbot's refusals. It was only when the abbot was also struck ill and paralyzed that he relented, granting her and some 20 nuns the freedom to operate out from St. Rupertsberg. In 1165, Hildegard also founded a second monastery for her nuns, at Eibingen. For much of her life, Hildegard only told Jutta of her visions, despite experiencing them from the age of 3 and understanding them to be visions from the age of 5. At the age of 42, however, Hildegard received a vision that she believed to be an instruction from God to write down that which you see and hear. Hildegard, however, was still hesitant to record and share these visions, eventually becoming sick of the drive to keep them hidden and the divine impetus to record them. She wrote about her troubles, and eventually, between 1147 and 1148, at the Synod in Trier, Pope Eugenius had heard about Hildegard's writings discussing her troubles. It was from this reading that she received papal approval to document her visions as legitimate revelations from the Holy Spirit, giving her much credence and much support. When Hildegard died on the 17th of September 1179, her sisters claimed they saw 2 streams of light in the skies, cross over the room where she lay dying. Hildegard wrote a staggering amount of books for a woman in her position, many on theology, others on her visions, but with many also on music, and many more on scientific and medicinal writings. Hildegard even wrote out the Lingua Ignota and the Literae Ignotiae, meaning alternative alphabet and unknown language. Her alternate alphabet served as a secret code, and while some experts suggest that her unknown language was used to promote unity among her nuns, others argue that there is no evidence of her nuns being aware of this language or practice. Throughout her life, Hildegard learned Latin and the ins and outs of the Christian faith, but she also contributed to the European rhetorical traditions. Hildegard authorized herself as a theologian, and held the belief that her monastery should exclude novice nuns who were not from the nobility, because she did not want her community to be divided on the basis of social status. She was also a fairly feminist figure for her time, stating that woman may be made from man, but no man can be made without a woman. So successful was she in the rhetorical arts that Hildegard transcended bans on women's social participation as a rhetorician and as a valid interpreter of scripture, preaching in not only monasteries, but in public, going on 4 separate preaching tours through Germany, speaking to the laity and the clergy alike, talking on many matters, but particularly denouncing clerical corruption, calling for reform. Many abbots and abbesses asked her for prayers and opinions on a wide variety of matters, and she acquired many devoted followers, while going as far as to correspond personally with popes, German emperors, and statesmen. These correspondences add importantly to her body of literary works. Despite being one of the first persons for whom the Roman canonization process was officially applied to, it took 4 attempts for the Church to officially canonize her as a saint. In 2012, Pope Benedict XVI venerated St. Hildegard to the entire Catholic Church, laying the groundwork for her officially becoming known as a Doctor of the Church, a title bestowed upon those who have contributed immensely to the theology and doctrine of the Church. Hildegard's feast day is the 17th of September, and she is considered the patron saint of musicians, writers, and ecology. Roch was a Majorcan Catholic confessor, born sometime in the late 13th to early 14th century in Montpellier, passing away in the late 14th century in Savoy. He was born to the son of the noble governor of the city of Montpellier, and he was considered a miracle, as his mother was known to be barren until she prayed to the Virgin Mary for healing. He was allegedly in possession of a birthmark of a red cross upon his chest, and for living a glad ascetic lifestyle, meaning one eschewing as many earthly goods as possible, from a very young age. When Roch turned 20, his parents passed. He distributed what little worldly goods he had among the poor. He entered the Franciscan Third Order of Monks, and set out as a mendicant pilgrim to Rome. All of this is in spite of the fact that it was believed that his father designated him governor on his deathbed. When he arrived in Italy, plague gripped the provinces, and Roch was very diligent in tending to the sick in the hospitals of Acquapendente, Cesena, Rimini, Novara, and finally, Rome. He was said to have effected many miraculous cures by way of prayer and the touch of his hand. While ministering at Piacenza, at the hospital of Nostra Signora di Bethlehem, he finally also contracted plague. Upon contraction, he withdrew into the nearby forest, making himself a hut of boughs and leaves. According to legend, a spring appeared not far from where he was staying, supplying him with clean water, and allegedly he would have perished of starvation had not a dog belonging to the nobleman Palestrelli supplied him with bread and licked his wounds, aiding in their closing. The Count, following his hunting dog that was carrying bread, discovered Roch and brought him home to recover. After his recovery, he began his return journey to Montpellier, but he was arrested at Voghera as a spy, on orders of his own uncle, where he languished in prison for 5 years without revealing his name to captors. Locals, however, recognized Roch by his birthmark and began to call upon his name to attempt to guard themselves from illness, and long before any canonization process took place from the seat of Rome, he was elevated to the status of sainthood in the popular mind, with a great church being raised in his name in Voghera. It is said that when church officials were threatened by the plague during the Council of Constance in the year 1414, public processions and prayers for Rock were ordered to be conducted, and the outbreak ceased its spread. Rock's popularity as a figure only grew with the continued spread of the bubonic plague in northern Italy, over a century after his own death. Saint Roch was canonized in 1590, with August the 16th as his feast day. Numerous fraternities and brotherhoods have been raised up in his honor, often dedicated to helping the sick, the injured, and the poor, as well as Pope Alexander VI raising a church and hospital in his honor. When he is commemorated in statue, he is often exposing either his birthmark or a bubo, a kind of inflamed sore brought on by the bubonic plague, on his thigh, and he is often accompanied by the hunting dog, sometimes holding bread in his mouth. Saint Roch is the patron saint of bachelors, the diseased, dogs, and the falsely accused. From the Welsh wilderness where hares found sanctuary beneath a saint's robe to the cloisters of the Rhine, where visions burned brighter than the sun, to the plague-stricken fields of Italy, where a dog carried bread to a dying man, the saints of history remind us that God's mighty holiness often blooms in the margins. None of these lives were particularly glamorous. They were often marked by solitude, suffering, and strange providences, yet through them, God showed his glory in quiet and unexpected ways. Melangeth, Hildegard, and Roch each testify that sanctity isn't a matter of power or status, but of surrender and of choosing faithfulness, even if the world isn't watching. They remind us that God's grace can find a home in the wilderness, in the sick room, and most importantly, in the soul that dares to listen. And that sometimes, the greatest miracles are not necessarily the ones that shake the world, but the ones that change a single heart, heal a single wound, or save a single hair. Thank you so much for watching, dear viewer. May God bless you.